today I'm with Dr. Alistair Wilson from Edinburgh, who among his many accomplishments is a church pastor, an academic, a missionary, a theologian, and also for his sins was the external examiner on my PhD. Alistair, thank you very much for spending some time and being willing to talk to us. I've just given a brief introduction there, but could you just say a bit more about yourself, where you're from, a bit about your background in mission?
Thank you, Eddie, and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. As you said, my name's Alistair Wilson. I'm from Inverness in the Scottish Highlands. That's my town of birth. And I grew up largely around that area. Hadn't really travelled far afield for much of my youth and early adult life. I'm married to Jenny. And Jenny, on the other hand, was from a missionary family. Right. Her parents served in Vietnam, and so Jenny was actually born in Vietnam, which has all sorts of interesting aspects when you come to get new passports and so on. But Jenny was born in Vietnam, although she has British citizenship. And so her family was in the heart of mission right from the start. They were part of WEC. And so I guess that led to a very strong mission influence when I met Jenny and when we got married. But even in my own family, we had various folks who were involved in mission in various ways. I've got 3 young adult children and an expanding family, son-in-law and 2 grandsons. And so yes, we're blessed with a very lovely family.
And you spent some time in Africa, am I right?
Yeah, so I was working as an academic in New Testament studies. So after a period of time working, I after school, just working out what I was going to do, I felt some sense of calling to a form of ministry. And so I ended up doing a theology, religious studies degree in New College in Edinburgh. So strangely enough, it's almost full circle. I'm working now in the next door building. And so I started with a religious studies degree, thought might end up in religious studies teaching. Yeah. Then sensed a call to ministry, and I was serving in ministry for a couple of years in the Highlands. And then I began, at that stage I was doing postgraduate studies, and I had the opportunity to start teaching New Testament studies at that time. So I was happily teaching New Testament studies in Scotland with Highland Theological College, as it was by that stage. And I was approached by the Free Church of Scotland to consider whether I would be willing to go with my family to South Africa. And so we sensed God's call in that, and so we went in 2005 to work in a place called Dumisani Theological Institute in a small town in the Eastern Cape of South Africa called King Williamstown, and we were there from 2005 till the end of 2014.
And your current role now, you're back in Scotland?
So I came back to Scotland in 2014 and worked for some time again in Highland Theological College, a strange providence and opportunity to serve in the same institution. And but that interest in mission and that connection between mission and biblical studies had been growing over a number of years. And so then the Free Church of Scotland, who run Edinburgh Theological Seminary, were looking to establish a centre for mission. And so I was approached and invited to apply to work there. And so I now am lecturer in mission and New Testament at Edinburgh Theological Seminary.
So a centre for mission sounds very exciting. Can you just say a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. So the concept of the Centre for Mission was developed prior to my direct involvement, and it reflects vision on the part of my colleagues at Edinburgh Theological Seminary for engaging with mission in its broadest sense. So there was a recognition that in Scotland there had been a strong heritage of mission-orientated theological education, in particularly associated with the Bible Training Institute, and then that ended up as Glasgow Bible College and International Christian College. Mm-hmm. But that organization ceased to function in the same form. Yeah. And my colleagues thought, well, it would be important, if possible, to have in Scotland a place where mission was a particular focus of attention in training. So the Centre for Mission has various aspects. It's thinking about how it can serve the church at a local level in each congregation's engagement with God's mission there. Thinking about how it can foster missional thinking among students and the wider church, thinking about how it can serve current mission workers, wherever they may be, who maybe need some time for refreshment or some time for further study, and then a more formal academic track where we offer missiological studies and such like.
And what is your student body like?
Say that again, please.
What is the student body like? What sort of students do you have?
Yeah, so my engagement in ETS is at both undergraduate and postgraduate level. Right. Yeah. The undergraduate student body reflects the diverse range of churches within Scotland. Many of our students would be from the UK, and with a growing number of internationals from Europe and further afield. At the postgraduate level, still similar, but perhaps a slightly larger number of international applicants. And we're starting to see perhaps more interest in studying with us from majority world students. And so, yeah, a good mixture of male and female, particularly at the postgraduate level. I think among my missiology students, masters in missiology students, more than half are female.
Oh, excellent.
A good range of ages, from younger students right through to more mature students. Quite a range of envisaged ministries, some looking to be involved in church planting, some already engaged in cross-cultural international mission, some looking to be based in the UK, whether in a traditional church role or perhaps in some kind of broader role within the mission of the church. So yeah, quite a diverse group. And it's a real pleasure to work with them, often coming with experience and with insights that I learn from as I also to shape their learning.
One thing that might surprise some people who are watching or listening is that your background is the Free Church of Scotland. Now, without wishing to be rude, not many people in the UK, never mind outside, know the Free Church very well. And those who do will often have a stereotype of a rather dour Scotsman in black hats and black suits, quite legalistic. And the whole idea of mission doesn't seem to fit with that stereotype. I hope you're not offended by that, but how would you respond?
Well, I think that the stereotype is certainly not unfamiliar to me. Yes. And I think certainly in Scotland, if not beyond, people like Ricky Fulton and I.M. Jolly have given an impression of Presbyterian ministers that is hard to shake off. And no doubt, there are all kinds of characters within the church and all kinds of expressions at the local level of the church. And probably some people and some churches reflect the caricature more than more than others. I like to think of the Free Church of Scotland as it is now, as a very contemporary, engaged church in its modern society. It's always actually had, since its inception in 1843, where it came out of the Church of Scotland for a couple of reasons, partly theological orthodoxy issues, but also the free in the Free Church of Scotland relates to the freedom of the church from the state imposition of a ministry on a local congregation.
Right.
So the idea that a local congregation should be free to choose its own minister. So that happened in 1843, where that decision, the so-called disruption, took place. And right from the earliest days, there's been a strong mission influence within the church. In fact, Alexander Duff, who famously was a missionary to India, joined the Free Church. Right. So it was one of the Free Church missionaries in its early years. And so there's been a strong heritage. The Free Church in more recent years has had some notable missionaries, including John A. Mackay, who founded the Anglo-Peruvian school in Lima, and who went on then to be president of Princeton Seminary later on. He went out initially to Latin America as a Free Church missionary. And there's also been a regular involvement, not only in Latin America, but also in India and in South Africa, where I ended up being. So I think that the church has been thinking significantly in recent years about how it can engage more creatively, more constructively, as part of the global church. Very small church, we're a small denomination, as you say, not many people have heard of us out with our own context. And so we recognize that we cannot single-handedly act and seek to shape mission, but we can seek to learn from each other, to cooperate with others, and we're seeking to do that more and more. You can find online Generation Mission, which runs its own podcasts with conversations with a whole range of mission practitioners and educators, and we are seeking to ensure that mission gets a high priority. So yes, caricatures are there. Perhaps sometimes we've deserved them, but I hope that we are learning to be much more a constructive voice in the global church situation, and that mission is a very much a major part of our thinking and our actions in these days.
I think one of the great benefits of being involved in global mission, the world church, is you find that caricatures don't fit, whether that be your caricature of the church in Africa or whether it's your caricature of the church in the Highlands of Scotland.
Absolutely. I think that's a really helpful point, Eddie. And I think that we learn how easy it is for someone to misunderstand us, and therefore how easy it may be for us to have got a misconceived notion of the way that Christians and churches are in other parts of the world. I think one of the huge blessings for me and for my family in the experience of spending time in Africa was just to have regular, close contact with brothers and sisters in Africa, and through mission work from a variety of different places, and to have the opportunity to get to know them as real people, to learn from them, to see some of the different practices and priorities, and to say, well, actually, there are things that I can learn, and there are things that I can reflect on in my own experience, which I may have thought were just normative, but which actually are just my own cultural heritage.
Yes. Yeah. Now, you mentioned the Generation Mission web pages. I'll put a link to those in with this video. So if anybody wants to pick up on that, they can do so. I'll also put a link to your courses.
Excellent.
Okay, so you teach New Testament and mission. Oh, I mean, in one sense, it's obvious mission happens in the New Testament, but how do you see those two disciplines interacting, sort of as an academic, but also in your life?
It certainly has its challenges to engage with two identifiable academic disciplines. So I think most academics would say that whichever discipline they are focused on, there's enough to read and to know
Yes.
and to engage with in that one discipline, never mind worrying about others.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that there's been a growing movement in academics towards an integration of thinking across some traditional boundaries. I think that the notion of silos has become something not as valuable as it perhaps might have focused on it in the past, and there is benefit in understanding a topic from a variety of perspectives. I think with respect to mission and biblical studies, especially, there's actually been quite a strong trajectory which I see myself being able to slot into. So some notable contributors to mission thinking have actually started in a biblical studies track. So I think of perhaps most notably, most famously, Chris Wright, whose primary focus is Old Testament studies, wrote primarily in Old Testament studies in his academic work, but whose personal engagement in cross-cultural mission led to an integration of mission studies and biblical studies. And my own PhD supervisor, Howard Marshall, when he wrote his New Testament theology, he wrote it with mission as a kind of governing concept. And there are a number of other New Testament scholars who have either had international cross-cultural mission experience or who have focused their attention. I think of David Wenham, having served in India prior to a more UK-based involvement in New Testament studies. Eckhart Schnabel in the States, having served in East Asia, and then writing a major study of mission in the New Testament. So I do think that there's a healthy integration of these two disciplines. And of course, what we're seeing in more recent days is the notion of a missional hermeneutic, a missional interpretation of scripture, and the kind of work that Michael Goheen and others are doing there. And I think there, the questions and the priorities of mission thinking are being helpfully applied to biblical studies. So it does mean that I have to try and think my way into a variety of different disciplines. So I may be thinking about exegetical work in one class, and then thinking about contextualization in another class, or thinking about mission history. So it does require perhaps that I spread myself a little more thinly than some academics would wish to do. But I find that very enlivening. I find it very invigorating. I find that I'm constantly learning, and so I hope that will continue as I go on in this area.
And can we look forward to you producing a book that goes some way towards integrating the two fields?
Well, I would hope to write in ways that do integrate the two fields. So most of my writing up to now has been smaller papers, but I have tried to find ways in which mission themes and biblical studies have integrated. So I have recently written, for instance, a paper on the possible connections between the stilling of the storm narrative in Mark 4 and the Jonah narrative in chapter 1 of the book of Jonah, and whether the purposes in God's mission of these two figures of Jesus and Jonah is in some respects a connecting theme. I've written on Colossians somewhat, and as I write more traditional commentaries, I'm always looking for ways in which either the mission themes in the text might come through, or in which the relevance of the text to the church's mission in the world today and the global church might be picked out. So I hope that as time goes on, I'll be able to write either smaller or larger pieces which do integrate these two areas.
Oh, that would be excellent. Now, you're teaching across two disciplines, which, as you say, stretches you more thinly than some academics might like. But in your spare time, you're also minister of a church which is 100 or more miles away from the college where you teach. I am tempted to ask, when do you sleep? But
well,
how do you integrate all of these things?
It would be very easy not to be able to find space for rest. But I should clarify that although we are based in the Highlands of Scotland and in the little town of Kingussie, which is a beautiful part of the country if anyone wants to visit, I'm not the formal minister of the congregation. So effectively what I do is provide resident supply preaching. But it means that my wife and I have an opportunity to serve this little congregation, and it's provided a good base for us. But a lot of the formal responsibility is covered by a colleague and the elders who oversee the church. So that takes some weight off my shoulders. But I think that there's been something very positive about this experience of teaching mission, thinking about mission principles, but also to be engaged in a very small community of believers, and to be engaged in a small community in the Highlands, and to think, how can we raise some of the issues that I'm thinking about in the classroom in the context of a local church. So one of the things that I see as a possible connection and as a positive experience here is that we will seek to have a global outlook in our little church, even though we are a very, very small community, just a small handful really, but thinking about how we function within this global church. And I think that's hugely invigorating and empowering for a small community, because they're not just focused on their own identity, but they're thinking, how are we part of a global movement in which God is gathering a people to himself? And that's also seen itself in, it's outworked in prayer, very consciously praying for the nations, even as we are in our particular part of Scotland. And also we've sought to draw in voices from other parts of the world. So when possible, we've had people coming and visiting and speaking where they're coming in from the global church in one place or another. So in fact, of our small community here, quite a number of the congregation have either connections with or experience of living in other parts of the world. And so we see mission in that global sense being worked out locally. We're also thinking about how we can participate in the task of making Jesus known in our words and in our actions in our community. And that's also part of the mission of the church.
And do you see that your work as an academic is also informed by the life of the church community?
I think so. I think that it's very easy as an academic to become familiar with and almost unaware of the terminology that we can slip into, the points at which we may take things for granted rather than explaining them. And so I think that it's been helpful for me to be constantly engaging with a regular gathering of God's people who may not have any of the formal framework. Some do, but not many would have that framework of formal theological education. But the principles that we're engaging with and the questions that we're discussing in class should be relevant to the folks in the church too. So I think that it helps me to be conscious of how I'm communicating in class. I ask myself, how would this come across to the folks in my church? And I also think, how can I make the folks in the church aware of some of the questions that we're discussing in the college environment? So I do think that it's been good for me to have that constant interaction between these two communities.
Yeah. So you've had a wide variety of experiences. You've worked in a college in Scotland. You've taught in South Africa. You're now, again, well, you came back to the same college. You're now at a different college. You're involved in the life of a church. You're teaching two disciplines. That gives you a broad overview, a broad experience. If you were to tie all that together and say, I trapped you for a couple of minutes with leaders of the evangelical movement in the UK, what out of your experience would you wish to say to them?
It's a good question and quite a challenging question. I think that I would want to say that theological education, when it is done well, and when it is done with a desire to seek the good of the church and to seek the good of the mission of God, is a hugely relevant and constructive commodity, a hugely constructive aspect of the church's life. I love how the Cape Town Commitment talks about theological education as an act of spiritual warfare, an act of spiritual conflict, as it engages with ideas and dethrones the ideas that seek to impose themselves on this world. And so I do think that that I would want to emphasize that theological education is not something that should be set against the mission of the church, the life of the church. But I would also want to say that we have much to learn from the global church. And even as I think about my own experience as a student of theology and of scripture, and as a teacher, I didn't listen as much as I would have wished to voices from different parts of the world. And so I would encourage students and fellow teachers and church leaders to take the opportunity to listen to other perspectives, to hear what's going on in the global church and to learn from that, which is not to say that you simply agree with everything that is being said by anyone anywhere. Everything is weighed, everything is engaged with, but that idea that you're in a conversation and you're learning from each other and you strengthen each other as you learn from each other, I think that that would be something I would want to encourage. So the notion that theological education in terms of biblical studies and theological studies, all of these traditional models of disciplines, I think that is still extremely valuable. But if that can be integrated with a missional principle and a missional direction, or in terms of the purpose of this theological study, and with that global listening process going on, then I think that that would be valuable for many.
Well, I hope we get some church leaders listening to this, even if I can't trap you with them. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alistair, for your time. Just to finish off, I like to try and get behind the sort of professional person and just learn a bit about you. So could you tell me your favorite pieces of music? A piece that a secular piece of music, a sacred piece of music?
So my musical tastes are quite diverse, and it's quite difficult to pin one down. So I enjoy listening to music such as ELO and Dire Straits and that sort of popular music. I think that in terms of one of the the musicians that I've particularly enjoyed listening to in recent times. I enjoy languages, and so one of the musicians I've listened to is Francis Cabrel, a French musician, and he has a beautiful song called African Tour, about the experience of migrants who have to leave their home and who wonder what experience they will find when they try to cross a border. And it's a deeply beautiful and deeply moving song, and so that's perhaps the one that I would pick out for the secular. For the Christian music, I enjoy modern hymns, and particularly my wife and I love the songs of the Gettys and Stuart Townend. One that has really caught my attention, partly because of its global feel, is a song called "O Children Come," where the Gettys collaborated with Ladysmith Black Mambazo from South Africa, and we had that lovely South African singing going along with the Gettys' voices. So perhaps that would be my my Christian song.
And if I were to ask the same question about books?
Books, so from the point of view of Christian books, it's really difficult to say. There are many books that I love, that I have learned from, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it has shaped me deeply. Perhaps it would be a tough call between J.I. Packer's Knowing God, which certainly was a very influential book in my early Christian life, and Chris Wright's The Mission of God's People, which is one of the books that I've gone back to again and again as a very readable and rich account of scripture and mission. In terms of a secular book, well, I'm not even sure that this counts, but it would have to be Lord of the Rings. That's the book that I go back to again and again. But I'm not sure that that it really is a non-Christian book, because the threads that run through it are so remarkable that it's on the borderline, I suspect.
There was once when I was working on a placement in 1980 where I've read it without a break. I started on Friday evening and stopped sometime on Sunday.
It's a remark. I've been listening to it over the last few days. It's just a remarkable piece of work for its grand scope, but also for the lovely use of language.
Yes. And that reminds me of one question I had wanted to ask earlier. But being a Highlander, as a Bible translator, I have to ask, do you speak or teach in Gaelic?
I have enough Gaelic to say I have no Gaelic. I can say Chanil Gaelicacum, but I'm afraid that is about my limit. So yes, I need to contextualize yet a little bit more here.
Is it used at all in Kingussie?
Oh, yes, indeed. So this part of the country, although it's Gaelic is perhaps more associated with the Western Isles.
Yes.
There would be a definite Gaelic heritage here, and the local primary school will teach Gaelic. And in fact, the old sign for our church, which is still on the wall of the new building, is the Free Church in Gaelic. So there's a strong heritage here in Lochaber.
Oh,
and I should say Badnoch here. It's but that sort of Central Highlands, yes, definitely a strong Gaelic influence.
Oh, well, that's good to know. As a Bible translator, I'm always glad to see that languages are surviving and thriving. Alistair.
Absolutely, and in fact, you may have picked up that when Duolingo launched their Scottish Gaelic option, it was immediately taken up, probably with more people learning Scottish Gaelic than there were native Gaelic speakers.
I got through the first 8 weeks.
well done.
But that was at the beginning of lockdown, and I don't remember anymore. Alistair, thank you very, very much for your time. It's been good to talk to you, very encouraging, and I hope that others have found this helpful. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eddie. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.